Welcome to Seeking Numina, the Sacred Places podcast. I'm your host, Elise Wells, and today we are joined by Carla Ionescu of the Artemis Research Center and the Goddess Project podcast, which I am a huge fan of. Dr. Carla Ionescu is a renowned ancient historian, scholar, and the foremost expert on Artemis, the revered goddess of the hunt, wilderness, and feminine power. As the founder of the Artemis Research Center, she has dedicated her career to uncovering the mythology, archaeology, and cultural impact of Artemis across the ancient world. With a PhD in ancient history from York University, Dr. Ionescu has traveled extensively, conducting field research at archaeological sites of Artemis's temples and exploring ancient goddess worship, sacred rituals, and female-centered traditions. Her work bridges the gap between academic research and spiritual exploration, making the legacy of Artemis accessible to scholars, historians, and modern seekers alike. And your internationally acclaimed book, She Who Hunts, Artemis, the Goddess Who Changed the World, is available as well. And that's the main thing I'm excited to chat with you about today is the sacred places associated with Artemis. And my cat, Willie, anyone watching on YouTube is going to see, is extremely excited as well. He's been joining us. Welcome to Seeking Numina. I'm your host, Elise Wells, and I invite you to connect with the sacred wild within and around you through Numina, or sacred sites around the world, and the wisdom they hold. Together, let's remember the old ways, build relationships with land spirits, and dare to reach out to the fairies. The sacred wild is inviting you to dance in the moonlight. Will you answer their call? Because as some people know, I live in Greece. We have an apartment on Artemis's temple lands. So right near the airport, actually, is one of the most incredibly sacred places to Artemis in the whole world. And that's where we live, at Verona in Brauran.
That's wonderful. Oh my God, what a dream. What a dream. Thank you so much for having me here. And wow, yes, what a dream to live on Artemis lands. I love the way you said that. Yes. And Verona is, one of my favorite places to Artemis as well. It was one of the first sites I went to when I was very, very young. And then one site that I keep returning to. Just to be in the presence and the energy of the goddess. And also, I love the fact that there's a museum pretty much dedicated to all the votive offerings to her and a couple other people, but a couple other goddesses. But yeah, you're just walking around in Artemis land and Artemis museum and Artemis everything.
What are some things that people might not associate with Artemis, but that you will find at her actual sacred sites?
Oh my goodness, so many. So I think that Artemis is often referred to as the goddess of the hunt. And so Artemis Diana very much around the hunt and the moon, which is foundational for her mythology, which is fine. But what I'm finding, especially with the mapping project, the Artemis mapping project, as we are going from temple to temple and we're finding numerous temples to Artemis, we are realizing that, in fact, she pretty much has every epithet that you can think of. She has every responsibility that you can think of. Men, women, children, marriage, transitions, life, death, wilderness, city. So for example, I did one of the lecture series yesterday on the Temple of Eritrea and Amarinthos, which is where they're doing some of the digging, the Swiss School of Archaeology. And I was explaining to the people, with the members watching, that yes, there's a Temple of Amarinthos in the city, but then there was another temple 11 kilometers in Eritrea. Then there's another sanctuary up in the mountain. And then there's another sanctuary or temple just west of Eritrea. So there's a temple to Apollo there, and Demeter and Hera. Everyone has one temple. Artemis has 4 or 5. So it's this kind of, and this is not the first time. We went to Tegea, for example, and we knew there was a temple to Athena there and that there was a temple to Artemis there. We walk in the museum and they have this map of Tegea and neighboring sort of mountains. And on the map, there's 3 or 4 more temples to Artemis that we hadn't even had on our own map, because we're going by the archaeological dig reports that are available online. But sometimes, because they're from different countries, the Norways, Finns, etc., that are coming to Greece to dig, you can't find everything. So then when we're at the museum, we're asking the curator, well, you've got two other temples up there. I didn't know they were there. I'm like, oh yeah, they're there. And then they tell us a little bit about who dug that up. And then we look that up, and then we try to find the temple. So once again, one temple to Athena, about 4 or 5 to Artemis. So my argument that is starting to build is that actually Artemis, well, I call her the people's goddess often, but I think now that's going to be backed up by more and more evidence. And I think my argument is going to be that she has more temples, certainly in Greece, than any other god or goddess on the Olympic pantheon. But I have to go everywhere and do, I mean, this is a very long project. It's going to take me 4 or 5 years, because there's so many temples. But I'm starting to see this pattern, of course, academically, you have to have a lot more evidence to prove that, and it will require a lot more work. But personally, between you and me and everyone watching and listening, I'm starting to see a pattern that is quite undeniable. And the other pattern that I'm starting to see, of course, is that there's more temples to goddesses than any gods, like Zeus. And in fact, we've come across temples where Zeus is supposed to be there, and it's him, Hera, and Artemis, or it's him, Hera, and Athena. He's always kind of in the middle of 2 other goddesses. So I think that eventually this will have serious implications as far as the way we think about the ancients, and certainly the fact that women were primary. We have this idea about the ancient Greeks, and modern Greeks have this idea about the ancient Greeks, very patriarchal, and classicists have these ideas about the ancient, very patriarchal, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not saying it wasn't. Certainly we have evidence that it was. But I think that everyday Greek women, actually, and men, but Greek women, had much more influence, political power, festival power, celebration, places of worship than we have been led to believe. And I think that will have an impact on our modern experience.
Yeah, and that makes me think, because in the town of Artemis, where I live, we have Vavrona, where she was revered more for her connections to women's mysteries and the way women would come into womanhood, really, the way young girls would transition to womanhood. This is the site known for the bear dance that, what's it called? The Arcti, yeah.
Yes, that's right.
And so like Arcuda means bear, so the Arcti is like the dance of the bear. And the little bears, the young girls becoming women would be celebrated there. The rites of passage would be honored there. And then on the other side of town, same town of Artemis, is Stavropoulos, Artemis of the Taurians, or of the bull. And it's a super different vibe. Tell folks a little bit about why she needed 2 sites in one town.
Well, that's a great question. And and then in Athens, up at the Parthenon, there's a temple to Artemis right in front of the temple there. And then there's Artemis Agraterra right across from the temple of Zeus as well. So
like in Athens, the temple. I didn't realize there was another temple there.
Yes. It was one of the other first places I went, because the first time I went to Greece, I went to Athens and around, right? But when I went the first time, which was 2010, the place was just starting to be dug up, and it was spray painted, and it was really messy, and it was really sad. I went now again for the mapping project. We were in Athens, and it's now gated. It's very well preserved. So that made me feel a lot better. And I don't know if there's a label to it now. But there's a label on the map. And there's another 1 or 2 temples to her, but they're not, they're under the city. So they haven't been dug up and may never be dug up. So I think it's something that class, because classicists and historians, certainly male historians and classes, didn't have any interest in Artemis. She wasn't the warrior Athena. She wasn't the mother Demeter. She wasn't the sexy Aphrodite.
Yeah,
she's just a maiden, supposedly, in the woods. They didn't find her significant. They didn't find her important. They couldn't relate to her. And so I think that they went, oh yeah, she's here, and oh yeah, she's there, and oh yeah, blah, blah. I mean, the temple right up at the top of the Parthenon is on the maps that you see, but when you're standing right beside it, there's no label. Like you're standing in front of it and there's no label. It just looks like a square rock, you know? I think it's her time, number one. I think my calling, it's funny, I had never believed in callings until she just would not let go, is this project. I think, and this is a non-academic perspective, that she really wants people to know that she's more than just a huntress. The huntress is fine, but that she was really deeply embedded in men and women's experiences. She had stadiums and people, had Olympic style games to her, and not the only one, but still much more significant than I think that we think of her.
Well, Stavropoulos is so different
Yes.
from Verona.
Yes, you're right. Yes. Okay. So I think that actually speaks exactly to this sense that she had numerous responsibilities and roles. So Verona is very much about women. And, again, classicists go, oh, well, this is when young girls went from wild bears to marriageable women. But they had no idea because they're all men and they couldn't go and they don't know. And so now I'm thinking the more that I'm getting to know how her temples were and where they were, I'm thinking, well, maybe these were menstruation rites. I mean, I'm sure they were in some ways menstruation rites because young women were coming to that age, but not about preparing for marriage as much as what if they were about fertility, sexuality, moon blood mysteries, womb mystery. So much can be. This period has so much potency, and no one knew. And in fact, the women that performed ritual there didn't really share, and certainly we don't have any of their writings.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that there may have been a more deeper connection. Now, when we're talking about Artemis Tauropolis, we're talking about now a bold kind of Artemis. Now we're talking about sort of this frenzy of power, this celebration of strength, sometimes quite violent, bloody, right? And so that to me speaks to the fact that Artemis can really straddle all of the aspects of what it means to be a human.
Yeah.
Right? From transition to celebration, to drunkenness, to mysteries, to sacrificing a massive, strong animal, power animal. Lots of areas where people thought to celebrate her in different ways. And I mean, these temples need to be funded. I mean, as a person that is trying to build a temple to her, at least a tholos, just the funding alone, right, would be, I mean, to find a place in Greece, to get a permit, to build a tholos, to see if they allow me, first of all, to have that kind of stuff there. But just that alone requires a certain financial investment. So all of these temples, and all the temples, required a financial investment. Many of these temples were financed by men, built by men, and then places of worship for women, because the women had to perform the rituals in such a way that everyone in the community was blessed and successful, right? So, I mean, there's these complexities that I guess we don't always talk about in detail. We go, yeah, there's a temple here and there's a temple here. And sometimes I think, man, that's a lot of money, and then maintenance of the temple, and then rituals of the temple, and cleaning of the temple, and the cults, like we can go on, right? So this tells me and us that the community felt that this was a good investment, that they felt this was an honor investment, that they got something out of these places that was very important for them to continually invest in.
Well, and it's something I always remind people, and you know this for sure, is that the people who wrote it down, like when we look at the quote unquote provable rituals or provable beliefs of the ancients, we have to go with either archaeology or written evidence. And when we stick with written evidence, which we want to think is more authentic and more clear,
Right.
it actually can give us a false sense of that because we only really started writing it down fairly recently in the history of the worship of any goddess we look at, but particularly Artemis, which I do want to talk to you about her evolution as Artemis.
Hmm.
But then we also were thinking, okay, well, who had the privilege that their writing would survive?
Yeah.
So we are always, it's her story over again and again where we see that the women's voices are omitted, but with Artemis rights particularly, we have to acknowledge the reality of that. We know
Yes.
that at Vavrona, she was revered in her childbirthing protective element. And her high priestess Iphigenia was so revered that her tomb became its own small temple where
That's
women
right.
where the clothes of childbirthing, the clothes worn during childbirthing would be given as an offering to Iphigenia,
Yes.
a priestess elevated to essentially demigoddess status for her
Yes.
power.
Yes. Yes. And then isn't that
Incredible.
amazing that in the story of Homer, she's just a 12, 14-year-old
On.
girl who is really a sacrifice because Artemis wants, like she becomes so flat and one-dimensional. Yeah, Iphigenia is a fascinating example of how women's stories and women's power becomes almost cartoonish.
Yeah.
Um,
Archetypal to a minimalist, like not even archetypal, like, yeah, like a token,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
device for a plot, not
yeah.
a fully fleshed out anything.
And in our minds, in our modern minds, because we have this image of this young, small girl being sacrificed by her father, helpless, blah, blah, blah. Even if we go with the myth that Artemis saved her at the last moment and replaced her with the bear, with the deer, which I'll go with. Still, there's a helplessness in that. There's again, this maidenhood that is made to be naive, helpless, vulnerable. And yet we have this immense goddess, and then Iphigenia, who plays this key role. And you're right, one of the problems that we have is that all the writings that survive are by men, and that women perhaps they took it for granted. We don't know their intentions. Perhaps they thought that oral narrative in what happens in the temple was just taken for granted in such a way among women. Like, we as women communities, we're still very much an oral narrative group. We still gather in circles, we share stories. We don't write that down. Certainly, we don't write other people's stories down. And sometimes we don't even write the rituals down because sometimes they're organic too, right?
Yeah. The
So,
feminine flow that we fall into is,
right? So someone had said to me once, Carla, I think that maybe the ancient priestesses maybe would have assumed that we could read the symbols, that we would know what this statue means, what this spiral means, what this day means, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, yeah, what if they did? What if they thought, well, this is so basic. Every woman knows. And no one was, of course, prepared for the dark ages of Christianity, certainly, or the severity of patriarchy. I do know that women were educated enough to have written stuff down. I do know they competed in poetess, in comedies, in all those kinds of things, other than just Sappho, but lots and lots of women. I know that they must have written stuff down. They must have been educated. Certainly, Socrates' teacher is a woman. We don't talk about that often enough. So they were in teaching authority positions. Yeah. But we don't have any of their writings. So what can we do?
yeah. Yeah, it's almost the fallacy of, which is what I love about your work, is that you're not afraid to remind people that yes, you're a historian and academic, but sometimes there is a calling aspect to it. Sometimes there is a spiritual side that, like I've had to get comfortable over the past few years because I also did my master's degree with a focus on modern spiritual studies, like kind of the syncretism between modern pagan practices and the development of witchcraft, things like that.
Yeah.
And I had to sort of do my own descent of Inanna in a way and take off some labels of like rigid proof, needing to always have proof. Like now I'm at a place where I'm like, okay, look, I went to the land of my ancestors. I meditated there with my drum. They showed me this song and chant. And was this what the ancients did exactly? I don't know, but it was something the land gave me. Like sometimes that's the only proof we can give. And I
Yes.
think that's okay as well. I think that's personal gnosis has always had its place. It's almost a patriarchal fallacy to say we need to always justify it with writing. And if
Yes.
you think I was recently at the Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C., and they were describing the way treaties were broken by the white man. And they were talking about how one of the main reasons why the treaties were so dangerous for the natives was that the natives believed in oral tradition. They honestly did not understand that by signing anything, which of course they didn't sign their name, they would sign with like a handprint or a symbol or a picture of a bird or something that represented their name. And so they thought that the oral agreements they were having were the real agreements because
Yes.
the oral tradition was so much more important to them. And I
Yeah.
think that's we know that was true for the Druids. We know that was true for the Anglo-Saxons. So I think that that's something we just truly forget in our modern brains, that oral tradition was so valid,
Yes. Yes.
more valid
Yes.
than.
Yes. And in part, in part, there could be also political propaganda that purposely elevates written record versus oral record. I mean, so there's a lot of that. And I'm not saying that all these people sort of got together and went, let's do this, but it's kind of flows in the
Yeah.
psyche, in the
It's an
consciousness.
extension of privilege to
That's
say,
right.
oh, you don't have that chiseled onto marble that was very, very expensive to buy and to learn how to chisel and to probably hire a professional to scribe it for you.
Yeah.
Privilege mounts.
But what's really funny too is how many women's names are in inscriptions that don't like. So I was in, for example, I was in Spain, and I was Cartagena. I went to this museum, and they have this entire wall full of like burial stelas that have inscriptions,
Mm.
and I would say 80% of it is women freeing slaves. So this is erected in honor of so and so who freed me. This
Mm.
is it. And I mean I videotaped it and I have to put it together, but I was like, I'm sorry. This is clear, written in stone evidence that women had powers. This is a Roman period, but that women had power, that they had money, that they were free. So I think a lot, even the inscriptions themselves, because so many of them make it into the books that are dedicated to men or heroes or whatever. I mean, why don't we have any inscriptions of the women that competed in the races? We know they did. Well, we do have them, but it's just no one bothered to put them all together and show them to us. And so there is a kind of ignorance due to classical bias or scholarly bias that we now take for granted as the norm. I mean, we're just learning that the medieval times, women could read and do math because all these dudes were going off to war and the women were left behind to manage the household, to buy groceries, to trade for goods, to blah, 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 to read contracts. We're just learning, like just now that the Celts were matrilineal. We're just learning that, half the graves of this place are women. I went to a museum once that was talking about Bronze Age kings and warriors, and the only evidence they had was 3 bodies of women buried with like with all kinds of goods and jewelry and things like that. I mean, they had evidence of swords and other stuff, but the burials, the bodies that they found, and the outfits were all women. So by the end of it, I said to my traveling partner Sandra's like, so there was a young woman at the beginning. There's a priestess. They labeled her a priestess in the middle, and then this other kind of maybe warrior woman they didn't want to say. But where are the male bodies? Yeah. So these are questions. I don't know. Do people walk through that museum exhibit on the kings of the Bronze Age in Eastern Europe and go, well, that was interesting that all these bodies are women that they like. So we don't ask these kinds of questions, or perhaps men don't ask those kinds of questions. So it's up to us to really ask these kinds of questions. And then I think what I'm trying to do with the mapping project that I would love to have done with a lot of other things is put all of that together. Like Gimbutas tried to do that with all of the artifacts that she found of the goddess. Of course, she was totally laughed out of school, even though she's a genius. Because when you put it together, and this is part of why I photograph and document everything, and I post it on social media and everywhere I can, because when you put it together, there's no denying all of the things that we're talking about right now: the influence of women, the power of women, the authority of women, the celebration of women by men and women, right? Like the women that are buried with their goods, that's their whole family. That's men and women burying them honorably. You know what I'm saying? It's not like, oh, women went, oh, let's just bury her. I mean, that's a communal investment. This is a person that's honored in the community.
Yeah.
So these are things that I think are coming to light. I think they're coming to light a little late, but there seems to be momentum for it. And we, all of us doing this work, are a part of that.
So Artemis evolved to be Artemis from, well, where do we think? Where do you think in your research, where do we think Artemis really, what are some of the threads that you're going down the rabbit hole on?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Oof, that's a tough question. That's probably the toughest question. Um, I lean towards the mistress of animals. So that could be easily Minoan Crete, but that could also be Anatolia
Yeah.
and parts of the Middle East. Um, I also sometimes lean towards hunter goddesses. There's lots in Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, lots in the north, Skadi and Air and lots of other goddesses out there. So I lean towards those. And then I lean towards bear goddesses, which are again a
Mm.
mix of Mediterranean Europe and all over Europe. So I think we don't know where the word Artemis comes from, really, or its background. But I think that at some point, the wherever people traveled and shared, when they saw a wilderness goddess or an animal goddess or a goddess related to birthing or women, all of those mixes, they went, oh, that sounds like Artemis. That sounds like Artemis. That sounds like Artemis. And so in a way, they all kind of evolved. She absorbed all of these aspects that were already in place. And she became this, and I think under the Greeks, and well, later with the Romans with Diana, I don't know. I'm torn about what happens with her when she becomes Diana. I feel like she's again sort of minimized in some ways,
Yeah, I've always felt that way too.
right? Very much the moon and kind of mystery. Anyway, so I think that I would go back to Neolithic and pre-Neolithic times where a goddess was worshipped in the woods, let's say, simply in the woods, and unnamed, maybe just mistress, because mistress is a word that was used a lot across different
Mm.
responsibilities of goddesses. So, Despoina is up north in the mountains, but Despoina is also in the underworld, and Despoina is everywhere. So I think originally ancient peoples didn't care for a name as much, perhaps because they were tribal, perhaps because they were nomadic, perhaps because it didn't matter. And once nation states started being more, and temples started being built, and you're like, well, who are you building this temple to? Well, her name is blah, or his name is blah. I
Yeah.
think. I mean, that's a wide geographical space and temporal space. But that seems to be the pattern as we go back in time, pre-Minoan, let's say, there's almost no naming.
Mhm.
And as we move forward in time, as city states start to become more established, there's more namings. And then the names, as we move forward in time, become blended. Isis, Aphrodite, Artemis, Diana, blah, blah, blah.
Artemis Hecate.
Yes, yes, yes. And, Artemis, Selene, Hecate, the triads. So I think as we get city states, we get complex divinities, complex relationships, etc.
That's a
She,
very good point about not even needing the names because, like in my work with land spirits, people are always like, well, I don't know what to call it.
yeah,
And I'm like, well, you don't have to. That's a human need. And in my book, Sacred Wild, I do have in there like rituals you can do to like find the name of your land spirits but it's for our comfort. I'm always very clear
yes,
about that. It's for our comfort. It's for how we, if there's multiple land spirits we work with, it does make it easier to say instead of land spirit A, maybe there's a better name for that. And so it
yeah,
makes perfect sense that that's where that would come.
yeah,
And so it's funny. So the word in Greek, despina, as mistress like that, it's a title of respect, and it is also one of the names for Mother Mary. And all of the epithets for Artemis
yes,
in modern Greece became epithets for Mother Mary.
yes.
All of them.
Yes. And what about Panagia or Panagia? Like,
Exactly.
so people say Panagia is Mother Mary, but the actual translation is not the Virgin Mary. It's like Sacred Woman or Holy Woman or, Holy Goddess or maybe Virginal Goddess. I don't know. Sometimes in Crete that gets a little bit overwhelmed. And
Yeah.
so sometimes I'm like, well, I think Artemis was also Panagaea, right? And
Yeah.
other goddesses as well. So isn't that interesting?
Well, and
And
even like Pangaea is like Gaia is right in there.
yes,
They will
yeah,
maintain, like, if you ask any modern Greek scholar, they will be like, no, it doesn't come from
yes,
Earth. It comes from, and I'm like, yeah, but how do you know that? Why are you
yeah,
so hell bent on that? You're hell bent on that because your teacher was, and he was a patriarchal white dude who did not want it to be anything else.
that's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. In what do you call it? In Crete, there is the Cave of the Bear, which is one of my favorite caves. And they have a little, of course, they have a little church there. And but once a year in February, they celebrate the Virgin Mary. So the Cave of the Bear is a celebration of Artemis and bears, continuation of that tradition. In the celebration, the modern celebration that they do now to this day, they honor the Virgin Mary because apparently there were mountain men who lived in this cave at some point in the past, and a bear was bothering them. And she killed and froze the bear because there's this natural formation that looks like a bear going to drink water. And she killed and froze the bear. So, what they're celebrating in February is her getting rid of the bear to help the men stay in the cave. In the cave of where Artemis and her bears were celebrated for thousands of years. So,
Yeah.
that is a tough one to tell without when I take people there, sometimes I'll do tours or private, tours with women and men. And it's a tough it's a tough story to tell because but I think it's a very good story of exactly what we're talking about here, which is taking a divinity that had such influential power and goodness, and in this case, because she could be quite aggressive in others, and then turning it into something that favors men, but still under this Panagaea,
Mhm.
you know.
It's just like the Pythia.
Yeah,
Apollo has to slay the Python,
right.
which is how the Pythias have their wisdom. They are
Yes,
the Python. They are the snake of I
yes.
think it's the land spirit. I think it's the earth energy of the Charybdis cave into,
And then Apollo is constantly represented with a snake at Delphi.
yeah. So
So what?
he literally just appropriates the
Right.
mystery.
Did you
Yeah.
kill the snake or are you taking the snake with you all the time? Oh, it looks like you're carrying that snake with you all the time. Like the hypocrisy, the contradiction is clear, and yet there has been no real challenge, certainly on the academic. Well, now I think more. Well,
Yeah.
that's not true. Again, Buddha's tried. I mean, there's some pioneers and certainly women scholars who try, but they're very easily silenced, and you got to really dig to find them.
I think that's why the work you're doing is so important and why I am so excited that this is now adding to that legacy of elevating these voices like yourself that are making a change. And of course, send me all the links to everything. There's your Artemis Temple mapping project, which is definitely going to be the top link because I think that is so, so cool. And then there's also Sarita Deste has a Hecate temple mapping project. And Artemis Hecate were worshipped together, maybe as one goddess, as a dyad, as two faces. Maybe they were just two lovely goddesses that fit the vibe together, and so they had temple spaces. When you were doing your map, were you realizing all the ways Hecate and Artemis overlap?
So it's so funny because Sarita and I read Sarita's book when I was a grad student, and it wasn't allowed on my PhD list because she's not a PhD. But I love, yeah, right?
Classic.
I love, I mean, I barely got Gimbutas on there, never mind. But I loved her work, and we started talking about a year ago now, maybe two, and we became really fast friends. And we have this discussion a lot because there's a hecateon in ancient Mycenae that is labeled as an Artemis, and very, I think, very clearly an Artemis hecateon. And so we have these very friendly debates about, is it the same goddess? Is it one goddess? And then you have the Artemis triad, which is Artemis, Hecate, and Selene. Where they, is these the three faces of the goddess? And so we have these long discussions about this, and the fact that, of course, the labeling is also often just whoever decides that this is something. Like the labels are not backed up like literally by it. So you can't go and go, oh, who made this label? And what is the evidence that they use for this? There's none of that, especially in Greek museums. Sometimes
Oh.
they're written by hand, you know? And you're like, okay, this could be Demeter, but where did you get it? And how did you decide it's Demeter? And so I have a series on my Patreon that's called Badly Labeled Artifacts, because there are some things that are like just number one, hilariously sad, and that I'd like to talk about. Um, so again, so we talk about this, who labeled it, and she's like, well, how do you know it's Artemis? I'm like, I think it's Artemis because look at her clothes. She's like, yeah, but sometimes Hecate wears that too. And then we see, Artemis has a lot of torches and a lot of torch imagery. And then we have this debate, is that Artemis? I'm like, well, every time she's wearing a bow and arrow, I'm going to say that's Artemis, And she's like, well, but sometimes Hecate is also hunting. And so we've had this, which is really fun. But also, I really enjoy everyone's sort of contribution, especially people who are really sort of digging into this kind of discussion about, let us rethink things. Like, I think sometimes in women's circles, there can be this sort of feeling like there's not enough, like there's too many people, there's too many women doing all these things. Yes, there's lots of women doing all that things, but there's just so much to dig through, so much to revisit, so much to question and be like, I don't have time to do all of that, certainly. Yesterday, someone asked me, well, is someone doing what you're doing for Artemis for Hera or Demeter? And I said, no, no one's doing anything because, well, number one, because the work is difficult, it's not easy. But also, I think people are not encouraged, right? Women, but even men are not really encouraged to, hey, let's go put this stuff together,
Yeah.
like, right? So maybe it's just starting. That would be fantastic. Imagine if we had maps for Athena of temples and maps for I mean, I think that would help my work because then I could be like, okay, how many temples are there for? How many have you found?
Hmm.
Or even just artifacts. There's so many. I went to one museum where they were like, oh yeah, there was 500 pieces found for Artemis Epicratea, which I didn't know existed before I went to this other museum. And it was the museum curator who saw me looking at Artemis and spent a lot of time taking pictures, was like, you seem like you're really interested in that. I said, yes, where are these 500 pieces? And she's like, well, they're probably in a warehouse somewhere. We just picked these two because they were the nicest to show. And I said to her at the time, I had this vision, I go, imagine if we, in that warehouse, put them all, like 500 statues, even if they're broken, put them all with like candlelight and let women walk around, because that's what it would have been like in the ancient world. When you walked into a temple of Artemis, there would have been 500, 700, 1,000 votive offerings, and you could walk around and you could see that, and just visually that changes your psychology.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That would be beautiful. I know. We were in, oh, I was in Ireland. I was in Dublin in the National Museum, and they had all of these Pictish and Celtic graves. And they were like, you can go to the basement to see their findings. And there was probably over 1,000 graves just separated, and it's a basement and you just have to pull drawers open, and I'm like, this is just so wrong. Like, nobody knows the history of this, and these people were buried forever, to be buried forever, and instead we dug them up, but then we put them in a bunch of drawers in a basement,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And I was the only one down there. It was very creepy. I was the only
Yeah.
one in this huge, massive basement, like.
Yeah. Even in Amarinthos, where they're doing the digs now, they said they've already found about 700 votive offerings to Artemis. But they're all in the back of the museum. Not one of them has been yet put outside.
Yeah.
And it's different to see one. So one of the things that I'm doing too is I'm noticing the different kind of votive offerings and I'm taking pictures of them. And maybe one day, who knows, I can sort of create a gallery with how many of the, because every museum like takes one or two and then they spread them around the world, right? But if you had 700 in this one place, when I went to Corfu, the museum there, they actually had them set up really nicely where they had maybe 15, 20, and then they had 15, 20, and then they had 15, 20. So you could kind of see how they were stacked up. That was very cool. That was very interesting. So, but the experience, so when you're living in that type of psychology as a woman and a man, your perspective is different than what we can imagine today. Like we're trying to imagine that context, but you're growing up in it. You're going to a temple for women's celebrations. You are in an initiation ritual as a woman. We don't have that today for even young girls to just get their menstruation. We don't have that. We barely just started doing crone rituals and doing blood mystery and all that kind of stuff. But imagine you're a young girl growing that. No matter what the patriarchy at that time, let's say in Athens, was saying to the Vervona women, they had a place where they celebrated their bodies. So
Yeah.
don't tell me that they were worse off than we are. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's nonsense because we don't have a place. They had a place where they celebrated the lesser mysteries, the greater mysteries with goddesses. And okay, fine. Hades can be in there too. Just growing up in that is going to change your psychology, no matter the patriarchy around you,
Yeah.
right? Because your father, brother, cousin is also supporting that celebration or maybe funding your way to get there or whatever, like the thesmophorias. Like, I think we've been sold many, many lies, but the worst is that the ancient Greek women were worse off than we are today or than modern day Greek women are, which we know the yayas are suffering. They did not grow up. One of the things that break my heart is especially when I'm in Crete and I talk to some of the local women there. I remember I went to go get my hair done and they kind of laugh it off. They're like, oh, you studied those gods and oh, those Minoans, blah, blah. And as she's doing my hair, and I was like, well, they did this and then they did this, and they worship this and the women did that. You could see a little bit of that. And really, I didn't know that. That sounds kind of cool, actually. That sounds kind of interesting. And I'm like, yes, I think that we have to keep in mind Greek women as well. Like
Yeah.
sometimes, we're doing it globally for women, but because they, last few generations especially have been quite tough for them as well. And they're tough, hard
Yeah.
women, but
People think, you know, Greece is, I mean, it's Europe, but it is a very patriarchal culture. My dad is very proud to be Greek, raised us to be proud to be Greek, but he would tell me when I was little, he was like, I don't think you should marry a Greek boy. Like he would literally, as I was getting into puberty, he was like, don't marry a Greek man. Like
yes,
they're not great. And it's an interesting thing that the Minoans, matriarchal culture, reigned on
yes,
Crete the longest. And Crete is actually the place with some of the most insidious patriarchal norms. I
yes,
mean, it is very normal to be groomed for marriage by an old man. It is actually the norm to do that. Your village will, the women will talk and they'll kind of betroth their daughters to their friends' older sons. We're
yes,
talking 30-year-olds to 13-year-olds. That is
yes,
the norm. And then when they turn 16, they get shipped off to Athens to marry him.
yeah.
And I mean, that is the norm. I have so many friends that that's their reality. So
And of course, domestic violence.
you
And
cannot get divorced in Greece. I mean, good luck. You have to wait for a court date, and it could take 12 to 15 years.
that's one of the things sometimes that makes me hesitate and build. So I'm always torn because that is the place. So first of all, the island of Crete calls to me like I lived there many, many lives.
Mm.
I always tell Sarita, the mountains feel like my brothers. Does that make sense to you? When I go there, I feel like I'm home with my family. But being there so long, each year, you get to know locals, whatever. You hang out with different women, and sometimes that stuff breaks my heart. And I'm just like, can I really build here? How much tension will there be? Will the local women be able to come and join my temple? There are some other women, local and not, that are trying to make a small, but you know how it is. It's a challenging situation.
Yeah, yeah. Even just to get comments for a wild hunt piece I was working on for over a year, I couldn't get anyone who would put their name to it. I got two people, but it wasn't their name, it was their magical names, not their legal names, who would use their names. And in a whole year of interviewing over 70 people, I only got 11 that would allow me to use their comments.
Yeah,
And like I said, two of them with pseudonyms only. So,
yeah,
and I tried to do in-person events the first 3 years I lived in Greece. and nobody was interested. So it is a very, it's hard to say it, but I do not think Greece is ready for the return of their ancient work. But I do think that people who can bring to Greece it's so funny because the Greeks were the great colonizers who would travel the world and spread their wisdom. And now the world that has the wisdom has been spread to is able to say, hey, don't you remember? You're the ones who showed us this. It's
Yes.
honestly very similar to Ireland. Ireland's music culture, their traditional music culture is pretty much, it's not gone, but it would have been gone if not for the American Irish. Literally, like the big bands of Chicago police bands, and if they hadn't written down the music in the 1800s when they emigrated, it would have been lost. It was reintroduced to Ireland to boost their tourism in the 60s and 70s by Americans. It doesn't
Wow.
mean it wasn't Irish culture. It was.
Wow.
It had just been lost in Ireland. So the same thing is happening in Greece because I see
Yeah.
the diaspora, whether that's like I have a couple of friends. Karina Felicino is one of the only women who will have a platform about it. She traveled to the UK to be initiated in witchcraft and then brought it back to Greece and is integrating Greek ancient practices into her work.
Yeah.
So it is working that way where we can leave and come back and make a change, and the people from the West can come and literally bring back to Greece its Greekness. It's beautiful.
I have this friend in Crete that's been there for generations. And long story short, she's most likely one of the Minoan priestesses reincarnated. She's had these powerful visions since she was a little child, which of course everyone in her community was like, oh, she must just be a little bit crazy. Anyway, she's an artist, she's wonderful. But one of the things that she says to me all the time is like, Carla, I don't talk to anybody in the village about this. I only talk to the Americans who come because she does ceramics and buy my stuff. And everybody in the village thinks, oh, you're doing these tourist things, but I'm actually doing some very purposeful goddess things. And the only people I feel very comfortable talking about that magic is those on the outside, because I'm very aware of representation. I mean, I was born in Romania and I have sort of Greek and Italian roots, but I don't want to speak for the Greek women. I would really like for them to speak for themselves. And so I love talking to them because I want them to share that experience. But she says to me, if I say that in my community, then my children will be ostracized, my husband will be ostracized. They'll be like, oh, they're the children of that crazy woman, blah blah. That really breaks my heart. And we have long conversation in the sense of like, what can I do to further? I'd love to tell your story, this kind of thing. I'd love to tell your story, and introduce you. But the truth is that I can do that with women that are coming to visit. And there's lots of women coming to. And so she says to me, well, perhaps the island is calling her daughters home. Perhaps Greece is calling her daughters home because we've been, everyone's been, all over the place in diaspora for, at least a couple of thousand years, and movement back and forth, wars, etc., immigration. And she said that to me. She was like, I think the island is calling her daughters home because it just feels like that feels like what it is. But this is just the beginning, and there's
Exactly.
tension.
Yeah, exactly. It will, Greece is ready. The land is ready. The
Yes.
people are not.
Yes.
So we will make the change. And that is why it is so important. Like I recently posted, like if you've been called to visit Greece, you have to. It is your spiritual obligation to answer that call because there's a reason. And pilgrimage in general is one of the most important things we can do for our spiritual path. But actually heeding the call when we're called somewhere, there's a reason. It's not just for us. It's because what we get so much from, the goddesses we get so much from, they need us to show up in their land. And it is healing the collective. It is making Greece more and more welcoming. There are so many people now bringing people to different sacred sites and
Yeah.
people visiting different sacred sites. And it is making all the difference. And the work that people like yourself are doing is making all the difference for future generations to be able to do. Like you said, like Maria Gimbutas, like she was laughed out of circles 50 years ago, but now we can actually cite her in our academic papers.
That's
And so
right.
it shall be for the future generations with your work and on and on and on until temples outnumber the churches once again.
Your words to her ears, my friend. Your words to her ears.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
So tell our listeners where they can find all of your stuff. And of course, I'll put these links in the show notes as well. How can they keep up with the Artemis Project and all of your work?
So anywhere on social media, TikTok, Instagram, those are my two main, but anywhere else, I'm under Artemis Expert. So just easy. The Goddess Project podcast is on YouTube and anywhere else you listen to the podcast. And then the mapping project and the actual map and all the other stuff, the courses that I teach and things like that, they're all on the artemisresearchcenter.com or artemiscenter.com. So they can go on there and like just kind of go through the website and see whatever they like, whatever they want to learn. I'm constantly updating it. So we put a pin up every 2 weeks of temples.
Wow.
Kind of building, because we've got a bunch, but I'd like to do a Substack. I have a Substack. It's called In Search of Artemis. So I'd like to do a little Substack on each place and how we got there and all that. But it's been a bit overwhelming because I'm also finishing this book on Artemis of Ephesus. So it's almost done. I just have to really finish I have to make the manuscript flow. Everything's written and then submit it. So hopefully this month I can do that. Yeah. Artemis of Ephesus is we could do a whole episode on that because that is another one of my things that I'm fighting for. Especially the so-called breasts that were later added by Renaissance men. Anyway, so that's the next book. And then we'll see. I've got a good 5-6 books about Artemis in different places in me. So.
Oh, that's great. And keep me posted because we can have you back on for sure because I love Artemis. She is such an important goddess. Yeah, Potniatheron as an epithet as well. Like we could do a whole episode just on that. So yeah, keep me updated on these books. I will definitely be reading them and sharing them with folks. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for seeking Numina with me today. Join me at patreon.com/EliseWells to support this show and get access to a library of rituals, exclusive videos, meditations, and more. To learn more about my upcoming retreats, book a tarot reading, or learn with me in workshops, classes, or mentorship, visit seekingnumina.com.